Happy Wednesday night, everyone. Welcome to Deep in the Plus. I'm your host, Rob Whiteside. Thank you guys, as always, for being with us. We appreciate you. And, of course, business out of the way, if you have not already, please subscribe to WDWNT TV for more great content. And, of course, give us a thumbs up already because you know you're going to love it. Tonight, we are talking about Mrs. Doubtfire with Allison. How are you, Allison? Hold on a second. Why am I not seeing you? There she is. Hi,
Hi.
Allison. How are you?
Hi. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. Miss Allison is somebody else because I was like going to lead in with Mrs. Doubtfire and then, but it didn't work out. So, thank you for being on. I appreciate it. This is a movie we've been trying to do for a long time, and it was one that I was actually in the theme park talking to Jake, excited about the fact that this was going to happen, and he said, "You know, that's not on Disney Plus right now, right?" Went through and looked, and it wasn't on Disney Plus. This thing has kind of come and gone over time, like a lot of the movies that we've been looking at doing. So I'm very excited to be talking to you about it. First thing out of the gate, I want to ask you: this movie was in 1993. You were pretty young then. Did you see this in the theater, or when was your first experience with this movie that made you go, "Hey, I want to review that one"?
I don't remember seeing it in a theater, but I'm sure that I did. I mean, this was an important movie for me. I think my parents got divorced the year before this movie came out, and this movie was on TV all the time, like throughout the 90s. So it's one that I had basically memorized at some point, and so I don't remember the first time I was watching it. I'm sure it was in the theater, but like there were so many subsequent viewings in my childhood that it's hard to remember.
That it never occurred to me because did the divorce thing speak to you at some point? Was like because that's a
The
big
entire
kind of a
movie.
yeah, it's the big part of the movie, and as a matter of fact, it kind of ends in a sort of semi-depressing way because of it. But they move on and they find other lives, and they talk about how they weren't really meant to be together, and But I mean, did was that do you think part of the draw for you, or just something you related to?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it for sure was. And my father was definitely a kid at heart and behaved as a child, and so was very and very devoted dad, just as Robin Williams is in the film. So I think it like really resonated with me, and like I'm sure it did for a lot of children of divorce in the '90s because the kind of behaviors that the adults engaged in and fighting in front of the kids and kind of sniping about the others, like all of that stuff was stuff that was happening in my life. And then it was nice to see like depicted on the screen and see other kids going through it. There was not a ton of relative. This is not a realistic film, but realistic depictions of the emotions of divorce in
Well,
the film.
I mean, there was some pretty intense moments in the movie with them yelling at each other and clearly defining for us as the audience that maybe this is a couple that doesn't need to be together. Obviously, they both love their kids, but maybe this is a couple that doesn't need to be together. You were talking about your dad being a fun dad. I'm looking at this card for Disney Plus. This is how it appears on Disney Plus when you pull up Mrs. Doubtfire. And its description is very interesting to me. The eccentric dad of three children dresses as a British nanny so he can care for his children at the home of their mother in this touching comedy. And I'm like, never in a million years would I have put that label on this movie if somebody was like, "Oh, what's Mrs. Doubtfire about?" I wouldn't go, "Well, it's about this eccentric dad." I don't know. It's just it's really funny to me. I think some of the things we want to talk about tonight are, does this still play in 2024 because it was a 1993 movie? Things have changed. Does it still hold up as far as entertainment value? And then obviously we want to talk about Robin Williams, who was such an amazing power. And I saw in the chat ahead of time before the show started that Ronald, I think it was Ronald, yeah, was saying like Mork and Mindy quotes because that was really the
Yeah.
first experience I had with Robin Williams because I'm old. Is that he
No,
was
it was mine too. Thanks to Nick at Night.
well, I was gonna say he appeared in Happy Days as a cameo, which was so
That was
bizarre.
great.
Talk about jumping the shark. He appears as an alien who has come to visit Earth, and then they spin that off into Mork and Mindy, and then kind of like Bosom Buddies was for Tom Hanks. Mork and Mindy was the launching pad for Robin Williams into movies, and then of course he's done an amazing array of things. But the question I have for you, and maybe we'll see what the chat has to say too, is When you think immediately, and try to put yourself in this headspace since we're reviewing Mrs. Doubtfire, but when you think of Robin Williams, what is the first or the biggest role you think of and attached to Robin Williams?
Honestly, it's this one, but probably second Genie. And this is all like Genie is what the next year, 94, right? Like this is peak Robin Williams time.
Yeah, I believe. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, for some reason that the genie is one that I associate with him as well. I asked a couple other people the question, and Hook came up, and I was like, really? That's where
Mm,
you go to is Hook. He does a great job as Peter Panning in Hook,
he
but
does.
there's a lot of movies. I remember a
And
movie.
maybe it would if I was a couple years older. I went to see Hook in the theaters. I think it came out in 1990. I was like 4 or 5 years old when it came out, so I remember it and remember it fairly well, but not as what like just a couple years makes a huge difference in like how it imprints. I think so. This is
Yeah,
like to me peak Robin
Kate
Williams.
is Kate is saying Mork and Mindy. Fire Chief said Genie Plus, obviously a little bit. Desi says Hook. Kate also says Goodwill Hunting. So,
Yeah.
which was a big deal for him. As a matter of fact, Goodwill Hunting was sort of semi-adjacent to this movie. I think, not Goodwill Hunting. That wasn't the one I was thinking of. I was thinking of,
Patch Adams.
no, but that's another good one. I was thinking of
Jack.
the what?
Jack. I'm just guessing Robin Williams
Jack.
movies now.
You're at this point you're just literally messing with me. No, it was Dead Poet Society was the one I was thinking of
Oh
because there's
yeah.
a reference to the Dead Poet Society in this one where he says instead of Carpe diem, seize the day, he says Carpe dentum, seize the teeth when the teeth fall out.
Hmm.
And that was a 1989 movie. Sorry, not so that was
Oh.
1989 Dead Poets. This was 1993. Yeah, so I mean, and again, we just associate Robin Williams with such great works. Now there was some stuff he tried to do, like there was a movie called The World According to Garp, which is a very hard, serious movie in a lot of ways, and kind of messed up. John Lithgow was in that one. I'm not sure I'd recommend that one, but there were a lot of movies where he tried to maybe be more serious, like a Goodwill Hunting or the Dead Poet Society. But and even Patch Adams has some serious in it. But I think movies like Jack are the kind that we'd like to see him in, and then Mrs. Doubtfire. So also, I kind of like honorable mention to a side project, which was not a Robin Williams movie, but Tootsie. Tootsie seems like a very similar situation, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is like a long line of movies of men in drag, like history that you have like some like it hot and Tootsie and this like this is I don't know we've done that always, but particularly between like 1940 and 1999, there's just like tons of movies like that.
Yeah, no, I know, but like in 1982 and in 1993, the kind of the premise is very similar. Into they want to get something, and to get that, they have to dress like a woman.
Yeah.
Whether it's Dustin Hoffman and Tootsie and trying to be an actor, or Robin Williams and trying to be a father to his children. So,
And I think there were nods to Tootsie in this too. Like when he's walking down the street with the purse, like the way the camera angle is shot, I was like, yeah, this is. He was then like mugged by someone on the street trying to take his purse, but it was like a Tootsie moment, just like
yeah.
Dustin Hoffman in the movie.
So let me ask you another question about this movie again before we really get into it. Is that it's labeled as, I believe, as a drama slash comedy. How do you what bucket do you put this movie in?
I think it's like I think it's pretty squarely in the comedy bucket. There's a lot of feeling to it, but I think comedies can have that. They can have heart and they can have soul, and this has this. It's not. There's lots of slapstick, but it's not just slapstick. It's like very driven by people's feelings and emotions.
There is a lot of slapstick slash awkward, cringy humor in this one that's very similar
That's
to
not
The
your
Office.
favorite.
It's not. It's not. We've talked about that before. That kind of humor, I have to work through it. Ben Stiller movies, all of them are like that. All of the Ben Stiller movies are like that. In Something About Mary, there's a lot of pausing where I just pause and go, okay, yeah, like all right, I can make it through this. But like, I think the king of all that is Michael Scott, the Steve Carell character from The Office, and so I feel like there's a lot of that in here in the things where he's trying to, basically be two people. Those sketches go on way too long for me. The one where he's
Yeah.
trying to be Mrs. Doubtfire and Daniel for the social worker, and then he's trying to be Daniel and Mrs. Doubtfire for his boss and his family. It's just so frustrating. And obviously, this situation happens on purpose to put him into the comedy. But you just look at it in 2024 and you go, just cancel on the family. Just cancel. Call in sick. Just don't do that. Like, find another way. They do show him trying to move that appointment with his would be boss to another time, and she's like, for the next 2 months there is nothing. But call in sick. The family's gonna understand. I mean, yeah. Anyway, so when I'm starting to watch this movie, the first thing that pops out to me is the cast, because first of all, I'm a huge Pierce Brosnan fan. There was a show called
Oh.
Remington Steele that I loved as a little kid. Again, you're like, I have no idea what that is. And so it was about a guy who ran a detective agency, but it was a woman started a detective agency a without a man, and so she felt like she needed to have a man as her icon, so she made up this Remington Steele character, and then this con artist finds out that that's the case, and he steps into the role, and then of course wackiness ensues. So Pierce Brosnan was in that. Ever, like, as soon as I saw that, I was like, he would make a great James Bond. They skipped over him a couple times, finally put him in as a James Bond. And that was only a few of the movies before he moved on from that. But I love seeing him and stuff. He's still in things. He was in the Percy Jackson movies, and then he was also in another one more recently with Ellen Barkin and Adam Devine that I'm missing the name of. But it was he plays in it, and he mentions something about being James Bond in it. It's really funny. But I love Pierce Brosnan. So when I was like, okay, Pierce Brosnan, Sally Field,
I
Robin
love Sally
Williams.
Field. I am a huge fan of Sally Field.
So, but I mean, from what? Like, where did you start your love of Sally Field?
Gidget.
Of course. Sorry, I don't know why. I don't know why I asked that. It certainly wasn't the Flying Nun or Smokey and the Bandit. So
No,
obviously,
it was Gidget. I mean, but also like she was in a lot of movies that were iconic during my childhood, right? Like in 95 or 96 as Forrest Gump, right? And this movie I watched a million times. I was watching and looking at her, I'm like, she looks fantastic. I'm like, how old is she? Like, is she about my age? She is 47 in this movie, and she looks unbelievable. Like, she's amazing, and she's such a like a lovable actress. And I feel like this role, it's like it's so hard. It could easily have been played as like shrill or as like a killjoy, and she like does it in this like very relatable way that you don't dislike her. So it's just a perfect choice. I did read that they the first choice for Robin Williams role was Warren Beatty, which would have been a very different movie.
yeah, I agree, and I don't know how Warren Beatty even like at that point would have pulled that off. Yeah, that would have been strange. The funny thing is about defining the roles, because you were saying she could have been shrill and all of that. Defining the roles between, like, the mom and the dad. There are a lot of TV shows that have that. The dad is the bumbling idiot, and the mom is the like uptight shrill, like you were talking about. I was
Yeah.
watching Modern Family recently, old episodes, and one like just happened to coincide with this sort of similar
Mm-hmm.
situation, where it was the episode where Claire was like, I'm tired of being the mean bad guy, and Phil,
Mm-hmm.
you need to be the bad guy, and so they reversed roles, and it didn't work out for them. She makes a point in this of saying, I'm tired of being the heavy. I'm tired of being, the one that has to be the adult to break these up, and you kind of feel that for her. And so I think that somebody with the talent of Sally Field was kind of necessary to give that some credibility, to not just say, hey, she's just being difficult, but for her to kind of emote the fact that, hey, you're making this hard for me to be a mom. You're making this hard for
Mm-hmm.
me because I can't enjoy my children because I'm having to treat you like one and be the bad cop here. And so I think you really
Yeah.
feel for her because of the brilliance of Sally Field.
Yeah, it's like of course you can't be in that marriage. It's horrible. It's like such a nightmare to come home from work. And there was a child in the background, literally swinging from a chandelier when she walked through the door. And she's got the cake and she's got a bunch of presents and she thinks she's gonna like have this celebration. And like I can't imagine a world in which my husband doesn't like let me know that there's plans for like a zoo and all this other stuff for this birthday party. That it's just like a surprise. You come home to this, like that's a total nightmare.
Yeah. And maybe part of it is he's just trying super hard. When the movie starts out, he's a voice actor and he's trying to voice this cartoon, and he kind of goes off script, which I think that would be exactly what Robin Williams would do. Because if you ever saw him on a late night TV show, you're like David Letterman or Johnny Carson. You're like, what are you? Do they have any control over this situation at all? Because he's running around and talking to the camera and doing other things like this. And so I feel like him breaking out of that character would be something that he would do. And it makes me think there's probably a lot of the stuff that he did ad lib, especially like the part where he's sitting next to the social worker and talking to her about what he does for a living, and they just keep cutting back and forth. And I want to know like how many cuts were there with him just trying to do all these bits. The same thing
Yeah.
for the genie in Aladdin, that there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of stuff. It's very pop culture, Jack Nicholson, things that you wonder like, do they still land 30 years later? So
Mm-hmm.
he's doing that at the beginning, and then he says, I have a problem with this because the bird's smoking and we need to be better about that. So now we see he has a pretty big conscience when it comes to children, especially, is like, hey, we need to do this. So we learned a lot through context very quickly without them being heavy-handed about it. So I think from a
Right.
writing standpoint, I feel like the dialogue wise, I think it's great. From a writing standpoint of the scenes, the slapstick scenes with him trying to be Mrs. Doubtfire and Daniel, I feel like that's a little lacking. That looks a little Jerry Lewis to me this far into watching it. But tell me what you think.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. Now, watching it as an adult, as a kid, like this is the 90s were like the time of like the one-liner catchphrases like Full House, right? Like this like repetitive and like just kind of stupid stuff delivered in a funny way was hilarious to children in the 90s. Probably still is, but I think like it's what made it palatable to young kids and families. But then it also had this layer where you're like, oh my God, and goodness, poor Miranda, and this marriage is it. So it's like sort of accessible, but yeah, I agree. It's like a bit tiresome right now to watch him with the cream on his face and dripping into the. It's like it's a lot.
Hello, like that's the famous line
Yeah.
right there, right?
Yeah. But the
Um,
montages are great, like the matchmaker montage and like so like that's fantastic. I
um,
could that could have been twice as long for me.
So here's the other problem with this cast is that to me these people all mean something. I think to people watching it in 2024 they'd be like, "Who?" Like Polly Holiday is in this. Polly Holiday was the menacing like next door neighbor, the one causing all the trouble
Mm,
that calls Miranda in her office to complain about what's going on. She was on a TV show called Alice where she played Flo, the sassy redheaded waitress. And then Matthew Lawrence is in this, of the Lawrence brothers. So Joey
yeah.
Lawrence's little brother Matthew was in this one. Harvey Firestein is in this as Daniel's brother, and I think does an amazing job in this one. Martin Mull is a very small character in this one, but the fact that he's in it is kind of cool to me. Also, I think that might have been his full head of hair there. That's kind of interesting. But Mara Wilson, so I think this was maybe Mara
Hmm.
Wilson's first acting job. And while she's adorable and delivers everything with such emotion, the enunciation that she's doing freaks me out.
Does it?
Like what?
My neighbor's kid sounds like that. Like she speaks like that. Like it's
Well, then I
actually like
apologize.
she sounds just like she
But
sounds just like
Mrs.
Zoe next door.
Doubtfire, you just have to come.
Yeah.
Like,
No, she
yeah.
she says my name like this. She's like Allison. It's like very everything is very enunciated. And she like Mara Wilson in this movie. I'm sort of in between Matthew Lawrence and Mara Wilson in age. but Mara Wilson is like sort of, she's like sort of become like a thinker, and she has, I think, her own podcast. She talks a lot about like growing up as a child star, and then having like grown out of the child star thing and not developed into like a ready to have a career as a starlet, because she didn't turn out that way. So she's really reflected in an interesting person, but she's clearly like a person who at 5 had a lot of gravitas.
Yeah. No, again, she has got, I mean, she's definitely a great little actress here, but the enunciation part seemed a little bit like it kind of took me out of that for a second, but in general, like the emotion that she showed, I thought was really well done.
Come meet
Um,
Zoe. Really smart 4-year-olds sound just like that.
sure. Sure. That makes sense. And then yeah, so the cast great. And unexpected almost, I think, at the time to put Sally Fields with Robin Williams, but like you said, that was not necessarily where they were going for it originally. And directed by Chris Columbus, who again, I mean, amazing, amazing director. So you know, and this is also based on a book. I famously am not a fan of reading. I know you are, but I assume it's a French book, so I assume you have not read the
No,
original
I have
source
not read
material.
the original.
Yeah. So again, the basic gist is that he screws up with this big party that he's having. Which, by the way, I was mad at the kids. I shouldn't be, but I'm mad at the kids for like letting this party happen, because clearly they know dad's a grown up kid, and that this is going to be like something where they're all going to get in trouble. Like, what was the end game? Did they not think they were going to get in trouble? He does say, "Oh, Miranda, you're home earlier than I thought. I was going to have all this taken care of." But this is the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Mm-hmm.
Miranda kicks him out. Then we go through some montages of him packing up the station wagon and leaving, and then a court scene where he is told that he can't have custody of the kids. He has visitation on Saturdays, but if he gets his act together, shows that he can have an apartment and a steady job, that, you know, then maybe they can revisit this. So, you know, now he's kind of going down that road. He's trying to find a job, and everything is moving in the right direction. And then he finds out from Miranda that she's looking for a housekeeper, somebody to watch the kids for 3 hours from the time they get home until the time of dinner. And he's like, "Let me do it." And she says no. So of course he screws with her ad that she's about to take to the newspaper in typical 80s 90s madcap way. He changes the numbers and then decides to call her and use like 12 different voices. I feel like at this point you're pushing it.
They're just letting Robin Williams be Robin Williams. And all of those things were like jokes we would make all the time. Like, "Don't make me get the hose." Like we like repeated that nonstop for years.
Yeah.
I know, not funny now. It's pushing it, but it was so funny for years for me. Don't
Yeah.
ruin this for me, Rob.
Sorry. I'm not gonna. No, not gonna ruin this for anybody. Nobody's ruining anything tonight. Um, but so then his final call to her is this new character, where this is going to be the one who he is going to basically blow her mind. This is the one that he wants to hire, or that she wants to hire, and he makes it an old British woman. And it seems like it's off the cuff that he does that, and yet that would seem like a bad idea. Like you're trying to do too many things to be a woman with a British accent, older, like, and you're going to have to maintain that. Like he's not thinking ahead on that kind of thing. And and so then he just makes up a name, and then, you know, goes from there. And then he goes to see his brother, who's happens to be a makeup artist, and says, "Hey, I need you to do this for me." And so then they go through another montage of trying to find what this woman looks like. And again, I'm thinking, wouldn't you have done that? And it's not as funny, I'm sure, but wouldn't you have done this before you called her and decided who you're going to
No,
be?
but you don't get to turn Robin Williams into Barbara Streisand then. So
Okay, that's fine. Um, but didn't they? Yeah, they do Fiddler. Is that what they do?
they
They
do, which is funny because Harvey Fierstein later played Tevye on Broadway, like 20 years later.
Yeah. So they make Mrs. Doubtfire, and he says at one point, "You look like Ma." That fire
Any
Harvey
closer
Firestein
and
says
you'd
it.
be
Yeah,
mom.
exactly. Harvey Firestein is so awesome. My favorite Harvey Firestein bit, and this makes no sense at all, is The Simpsons had an episode where Homer Simpson gets an assistant, and his name is Carl, and he's like, it's just if you haven't seen it, look it up. It's so great. But again, Harvey Firestein does the voice for that. Just a once in a lifetime voice. It's very interesting.
I loved how
Um,
many New York accents there were in this in San Francisco. Like the cop that's breaking up the party had a New York accent. Harvey Firestein has this very strong New York accent. There was like somebody else randomly. I was like, oh, this is great. This is all very relatable for me.
yeah. So so he dresses up as Mrs. Doubtfire. He goes to meet the family. The kids don't recognize him. I actually think they did a pretty good job. Like, honestly, it's far fetched to think you could live with somebody for that long, be married to them, and not recognize them, especially when he does voices all the time. Like, if she had
Mhm.
no idea that he could do voices, or had never tried to do these things, I get it a little bit, but it seems hard, like far fetched. It's the Superman effect, right? He takes off his glasses and he's Superman. He puts them on, and they're like, well, that's just Clark Kent. Um, the fact that his family, his wife, his kids would not recognize him is is hard to believe. And there's definitely something that looks off about him, but it doesn't necessarily look like Robin Williams. So I think they
Mhm.
did a really good job. They went and they did like the prosthetic. Where Harvey Firestein's character says we're gonna need to go with plaster, and then
Latex. Yeah.
they do the latex, they do the teeth, they do the hair. The eyes would be the only thing that's really
Mhm.
truly, I think, him. But yeah, I think they do. Because that was the thing I was going to be very critical of when I went back and watched this movie. Like, oh, they're never going to pull this off. But it does. I mean, it is a pretty convincing transformation.
Yeah, and and they're not looking for it. Here comes this old British woman. They're not. There's a moment where she's like, "God, you remind me of someone," and she's like looking, and she's like, "That's insane," because it
Yeah.
is insane. The whole thing is insane, and if you let your mind go there, it's like, "Oh man, this divorce is really getting to me," because I'm thinking this old
I,
British woman
I
is my
see. Yeah,
ex-husband.
I see him everywhere I go.
Yeah, like
Yeah, and some
totally
people
crazy.
got more into the character than others. This creepy bus driver dude, and how do we feel about that guy? Like, when Mrs. Doubtfire gets back on the bus, this creepy bus driver is there every night, and I say creepy, but he just kind of he's enamored by her.
Yes.
And so, he keeps sort of talking to her, and he's nice. He's nice enough. He doesn't do anything too offensive. And then at some point, when he sees Robin Williams like leg, and of course Robin Williams is a very hairy dude. Like, I think we
He
like
is.
we knew that in other movies they make fun of that, but his leg with all his leg hair, and and the bus driver says something like, "I love a woman who keeps it natural," or something like that. It was just like,
Yeah.
oh.
Very
Ugh.
natural.
I don't really. Now
Uh,
you're crossing a line. Now you're crossing a line.
Yeah, it is a little bit funny to subject Mrs. Doubtfire to the male gaze, but I'm fine with it being depicted because that is a reality for women, I guess, regardless of age. And good for the bus driver for at least looking at someone who's age appropriate.
Fair. So, one other thing I noticed in this was that when he goes back to his apartment, then he runs into the social worker, and she insists on coming up and didn't know about Mrs. Doubtfire, and she's like, "Oh, I'm Daniel's sister," and then it's like, okay, that doesn't hardly make sense because of the British thing, and then Daniel tries to explain his way out of it. But when he gets back, he has to transform out of Mrs. Doubtfire into Daniel, and when he does, there's this bust that is Robin Williams' face. Did this need to exist as Robin Williams' face? Like, I mean, and it's not the mold that his brother made him. It's where he keeps the mold. It's just, I don't know. It's weird to me that would, is that a thing?
I don't know. I'm not a makeup artist. I don't have latex faces in my home, so I don't know what it needs to
So
sit.
you
Maybe it needs
say.
to sit there to stay on there.
So you say. We don't know. I mean, we honestly don't know. Um, here's a timeout moment that I have in here with him is that he, as Mrs. Doubtfire, and go with me on this one because I don't know what your perspective would be on this one, but as Daniel to his wife, to his kids, he wasn't what they needed him to be, because he was the fun dad, but he wasn't the responsible dad. He wasn't the responsible husband. He wasn't he didn't keep a job for long enough. He didn't, there were all these other things he didn't do. But he seems to know what those things are, because he knows what Mrs. Doubtfire needs to be what Miranda needs. He knows it's like he's read her diary, and he knows everything that Miranda's going to need. So clearly, as a husband, he knew it, which then just makes me angry at him that he couldn't have done that as I don't know. What are your
I
thoughts on
know.
that?
I know. I mean, I feel the same way, but it's like exactly why, like, you can't be married to that person. He's like, he's capable, but he's actually refusing to do it. But I do understand that, like, sometimes it's easier if you're playing a role, and if he's like himself, he's just like, this just isn't me. But in improv, I can pull this off. But you'd think he'd be able to like grow a little bit as like a grown-up man.
Well, and
Instead, he
through
can only do this in this fraudulent deception that he's
right.
pulling on his poor ex-wife.
But through all of the Mrs. Doubtfire role, he becomes what they need him to be as Mrs. Doubtfire, which then kind of, and we see that morph into what happens in his apartment. That, the first time we see him, there are boxes everywhere. The apartment is just kind of a mess, which seems like it happened immediately, that it was a mess. I don't know how that happened. Usually when you move in and you've got boxes, you're okay until you empty them all. I don't know. So he kind of messes things up as he goes along. He brings the kids over. There's like a crummy folding table that they're eating takeout or Chinese takeout on, and it's just like tragic. And I guess that's where they set like the barometer, so that we can then see how much he's grown over time. But through what he's doing as Mrs. Doubtfire, he then starts doing in his own life, and so he's kind of learning all of those things along the way. But it just makes me think, couldn't you have maybe done this a little sooner? But I guess you need to hit rock bottom sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
So I do want to say to everyone who's watching, we're watching in the chat, so thank you guys for being active in the chat. We appreciate it, and thank you guys for watching this with us. If you haven't already, give us a thumbs up, because right now I want to ask Allison some trivia questions off of one of her favorite movies of all time. If it's not too bold to ask that question, right? I honestly think some of these are very easy. Some of them are not, though. I'm going to give you that some of them are not super easy. So,
how many of these are there?
out of the 100 questions I've put together, no, I'm just kidding. There are not 100 questions. There are a few, but there are not 100. When are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
So, no, you're ready. It's fine. When the movie starts, he is voicing a cartoon for a bird. What color is that bird?
Yellow? I don't remember.
Close.
It looks a little like Tweety Bird, so I was guessing yellow.
Yeah, it's green.
Oh, it's like green.
But I think they probably went out of their way to make it look different than Tweety. But yeah, it is a very similar thing to Tweety. And as he's doing these voices, I'm definitely thinking, Mel Blanc. That's what's channeling for me, because Mel Blanc does all the characters for all of the all of the Looney Tunes, and he's doing the character of the cat, and he's doing the character of the bird, and he does a lot of others. So yeah, it's green. I wasn't sure if that would be an easy one or not.
No, visual is tough for me.
Okay. How long were the Hillards married?
Oh, they say 14 years?
Yes, that is correct. 14 years. I was going to ask you what city this takes place in, but you already knew that. They never really, I don't think, say that it's San Francisco, but there are
enough establishing shots.
The cable car and the houses obviously look very much like the kind of houses that you would see in San Francisco. The agency that Miranda works for, do you know the name? It's three people's names. Do you know the names of the ad agency? Okay, it's Gregory, Henderson, and Hillard.
Yeah.
So, because the Martin Mull, I think, plays Mr. Gregory, and so I'm not Can't remember if we
Mm-hmm.
met Mr. Henderson, and then Hillard is her name. Um, this one may be hard for you to figure out. Um, when he makes up the name Mrs. Doubtfire, he looks down at a newspaper, which is again a very cheesy thing. It's kind of like when Brick Tamlin looks around the room and goes, "I love lamp." It's
Mm-hmm.
it. He looks around and he finds a headline. Do you know what the headline said?
It said police doubt fire, and then I don't remember the other words.
That's so freaking close. Police doubt fire was accidental.
Yeah.
So, which is absolutely how how a headline would look, right? Police doubt fire was accidental. I don't know. It looked a little bit much, but
Yeah.
anyway. Honestly, those are the only ones that I was going to ask you.
Ah, good. Good.
Uh, anyway, thank you for playing at that. I just think again, this is such an interesting movie because I feel like it's a comedy, it's a drama, it takes on hard, topics, and then at the same time it's also, got the goofball him running back and forth between the bathrooms and everything. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, a little bit interesting. So getting back into this, when one of the questions I have from a logistical standpoint, and you and I talked about this about a New York apartment before, like, and I forget, I think it was Enchanted, where like
Yeah.
what would that apartment actually cost in New York, and really could Robert afford that apartment and all of that? Here's my question: where's he getting all these clothes?
Oh, for Mrs. Doubtfire? Oh, it's funny. It's like he just seemed to like walk out of his brother's with like this full like wardrobe. But you know what? Maybe a thrift shop because actually those clothes are very much like kind of what you would find in a thrift shop. But they should show him kind of needing to do some of that. It's like once he gets like the full makeover done, it's like okay, that's it. I'm all set. Um, but it would be
Yep.
funny to see him like kind of shopping
Ronald
for
said
undergarments and dresses.
Yeah, Ronald said thrift store as well. I mean, I get that, but it's just like he is strapped for cash,
Mm-hmm.
and he's got a different outfit on. I don't think Mrs. Doubtfire like duplicates outfits. Like she's wearing something different every time, and I'm just thinking, like also I don't know how thorough the social worker is when she inspects the apartment, but wouldn't there be a lot of Mrs. Doubtfire things all over the apartment? But
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's like kind of intrusive for her to go literally everywhere, but they can be intrusive. She's like simultaneously like overly thorough and then not thorough enough.
Well, and Miranda makes a point at one point about saying how Daniel, she had talked to the social worker, and she had said something about that there was a sister, but she knew Daniel didn't
Yeah.
have a sister, and she's telling Mrs. Doubtfire all of this stuff, which means like this is still early on. I don't know what the relationship is that the social worker has to report to Miranda, because I feel like she's supposed to report to the court.
Hmm.
I don't know how those situations work, but also at the same time, like, shouldn't there have been a red flag if she's like, okay, wait a minute, there isn't a sister, I should look into this,
Right.
because
Well, the
Miranda
social
just
worker,
writes it
yeah.
off, yeah, writes it off as he's having an affair, or not an
The
affair,
social
but he's
worker can
found somebody.
talk to anyone she wants technically and to gather information, so
Yeah,
that's probably, but what the fact that it didn't ever come back around to him like after Miranda was like, wait, I don't know what he's talking about. She doesn't have a sister, he doesn't have a sister. It's very weird that this old woman is in his apartment. um
yeah.
and
I
and
guess
that
I'm.
wasn't the thing that exposed it. They had to have this like insane dinner that I'm sure was very uncomfortable for you to watch. And it
Yeah,
was for me too, mostly because that business meeting was like cartoonish.
yeah, true. But again, it's one of those situations where you're like, okay, I don't know. It's madcap, is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Along the way of doing his day job, which is the one that he reports to the social worker, which is working boxing up films for a TV station. He is also doing the Mrs. Doubtfire gig at night. Um, And then the very first time he does it, he tries to cook, and that's another one of these like wacky situations where he burns his boobs, and and it gets a little weird. And then he decides he's going to order food, and he ends up paying $140 for dinner to impress them. Again, he's not making a ton of money, and so this insane wardrobe that he's got as Mrs. Doubtfire, plus all of the things he does to fix up his apartment and all that kind of stuff, seems like it happens pretty quickly. So maybe we don't care about that kind of stuff, but those are the details that I like, look at and go,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, I was wondering how is like they're paying Mrs. Doubtfire, so maybe they're just giving her $300 in cash every week, or maybe they're giving a check, but he can't cash a check that's written to Imogene Doubtfire. Like that's going to be difficult. So if he is getting cash, that does help, right? Because he does have a full-time job, albeit like not a lucrative one, but he has a full-time job to like sort of get himself established. And then plus they're not actually like fully divorced, right? Like it takes some time to do that. So technically, her money's still his as they're separating.
So was he getting alimony?
Almost certainly, he was getting some kind of spousal support,
Hmm.
and
Okay.
also like their savings and whatever that she made at that point is 50% his. I think that California is a common law state where like it's exactly like half and half. So he would
Okay.
be entitled
Now
to
we're
like
getting
half of
granular.
anything.
Now we're
I
getting
know,
granular.
but now, yeah,
I started
but
it.
technically, that's
I started it. Yeah.
technically
But
he's got to figure out how to exist on his own because the spousal support would be temporary. But like
yeah.
that first beginning, he's not completely destitute because she obviously was doing well in her career.
Yeah. Looking at the chat, Rosita just showed up. Let's go back to the beginning and start all over. I'm kidding. I'm not really. Are you? It's a joke. Anyway, so basically, when he's in the day job, he gets to see this guy who is kind of like a Mr. Science guy, and he's out there and he's doing this dinosaur presentation or show or something, and it's a little bit rough to watch. And so when he's sitting there watching it with the boss, he's making fun of it. Then the boss says, "Hey, we're gonna, when they're talking back and forth with each other, he says, yeah, this guy's awful." And he's like, "I wonder who hired him." And he says, "Oh, well, I did." And now we're seeing, okay, this is where this movie may be going, is he may be having a second job with the TV station. We know that Robin Williams is, his character is very entertaining. So honestly, as I'm watching this part of it, I'm thinking like, all right, I already know where this is going. And I can't remember if when this originally rolled around, if I felt the same way, is if like it seemed that, what's the word I'm looking for? Predictable. I don't know if that was a thing that was happening then or not. So, as I'm trying to figure out if like, I can't remember if it's my memory of this movie that he was so predictable in what he did, or whether it's just looking at it from 2024. But you can kind of see the writing on the wall. He's going to get this job as the guy running the children's show. He also does a little bit more ad lib where he's like caught by the boss doing the dinosaur fighting and everything, and doing a little rap, and again being very sort of like a little bit topical, but also using references like James Brown, that like, would kids even get that kind of a thing? So, I mean, do you think it's that predictable, or is it just because we're familiar with this kind of scenario now?
I think that it is a little it's good storytelling, right? Because they from the beginning, like, this is what he's good at, this is what he wants to do. It's a little predictable that he happens to be talking to the boss and like and make an impression on him. But I'm also like, you're sort of rooting for him, so like I'm glad that we get to see the progression of how he ends up where he ends up, professionally by the end of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not realistic, but at least we're seeing how it changes from just like packing boxes to and getting fired from a legitimate job before that, because of his scruples.
Yeah, the one thing that I kind of had forgotten is, so after this, he's got a meeting with the boss, and then also Miranda's becoming very close to the Pierce Brosnan character, and they're Stuart, and they're going to have this big dinner for Miranda's birthday, and they go out to a restaurant, which happens to be the same restaurant where he's going to meet with his boss, and so they insist he come, and that's what I was talking about at the beginning. They go there, and he's like running back and forth between the two. I don't know that at that point that I remembered. I know I remembered he got the show, but I don't know that I remembered that the show was Mrs. Doubtfire. And there's a funny line where they're Miranda and the kids, they see that he's on TV as Mrs. Doubtfire. He's gotten the children's show. It's not just him. It's now this character that he claimed to his boss he was introducing to him at that point by dressing up. And he says to Miranda, she's like, "Oh, this is amazing." And he goes, "Welcome, welcome to Mrs. Doubtfire's house." And he says, "Well, you got to see the dress rehearsal." And I thought to myself, if I were her, I would have smacked him right at that point, because like that was, I don't know, thoughts.
Too soon? Like I can't joke about this.
I guess, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that woman was very used to that man's antics, and I mean, okay, I love the scene where it's revealed at the dinner, and she's just like apoplectic. She's just like the whole time, and then she's like, "I have to go. We have to go. I have to go." And she's just like, I was like, "Yes, that's exactly how I would react in that scenario." And then I
yeah,
think she's also like used to, after 14 years with that man, like having to be laugh at the situation later. and and at that point, like they're divorced, they have their own lives, they've moved on, like they have to be able to laugh at the
yeah.
situation, or you will not survive life co-parenting with your ex-husband if you can't.
One thing I
But
don't know.
it's another indication that she's very cool, like that she's
Yeah,
not uptight, that she can she
right. One of the things that I don't think they do a great job of is how long is it from the time this movie starts until it ends? Like the passage of
oh
time
yeah.
is, I'm not really sure.
Yeah. Well, the judge says when they do the first thing that like we'll revisit this oh no, that's the end, that they're going to revisit it in a year, right? Like,
Yeah,
and so and yeah, it's really unclear. But I guess you can sort of look at it with like how the relationship with Pierce Brosnan is developing too, because
right.
like she sees him for the first time like the day after she's decided she's going to get a divorce, and then is like sort of
But is it the day
starting
after?
to distract him.
That's the thing again. Like I think that
Yeah. No, it is
it is the
definitely the day
next.
after, because yeah.
I
It's the
was gonna
day
say,
after because she has to leave her work to go deal with the zoo at home. And her boss is like, "Hey, this guy called and he wants to meet with you tomorrow for about whatever." Or actually, I guess she has to call him first thing the next day, so it may not be exactly the next day. So,
yeah,
I mean, it's soon after that. We
yeah.
don't have exact dates, but
Well, there's a rough scene, and here's a thing where it may get this may be a weird question, but there's a rough scene after the dinner scene, after they have the dinner, where it's exposed to not only his boss but also his family, that he and his daughter, because his youngest daughter doesn't know that he's Mrs. Doubtfire. They said don't tell her. He said don't tell her. The boy finds out in a very weird way, where he walks into the bathroom when Mrs. Doubtfire is in there,
yeah,
um, and then shares it with the older sister, who then the two of them know. And but the the Matthew Lawrence character is very. He doesn't want to like hug the dad because he looks too weird, and that to me gave me some very weird vibes. And then um, when the court uh, they cut to the court scene, which I think was supposed to be 3 months after our first court scene, but it could have been kind of hurried because of this new situation. Like
mm,
she's like through it, and like maybe we didn't wait 3 months. Maybe this is like an emergency session
yeah,
because she wants full custody because he's crazy. But that's the thing. They said because of your behavior, you're going to have supervision, and you need a therapist, and there's something else about it. And to me, that made me feel weird about, like, what's the behavior? Like, I
Yeah.
get that
I
he,
mean, there was, yeah,
like, dressing like a
there's a
woman.
weird,
Is
yeah.
that what you're about here? Like, that's,
One
see
of
where I'm
the
going with that?
voices, yeah, one of the voices he does like a German voice, and he's like, "I don't work with the males because I used to be one." And Miranda's like so scandalized and hangs up the phone. So, and then of course the son's reaction. And
Yeah.
like this is one of those things. Like, I mean, kids right now would not be so creeped out by trans people. Like it just wouldn't be the thing. But I do think that the fact that he's like got his two oldest kids roped up in this fraud with the mom and like lying to everyone else, like that behavior is developmentally like not appropriate with children. Like I was watching
Okay.
with my husband and he's like, and as soon as he talks to the older kids and he's like, don't tell your mom, don't tell Natalie, like just keep it between us. He's like, oh yeah, real good, have secrets between like between the parents and whatever. Like that is not appropriate parenting. And the fact that he's defrauding his ex-wife, taking money from her to do this, like all of it is like totally bonkers,
But
insane, and affects your ability. I think like would put questions in a judge's mind is like, should you be allowed to be around your kids, because like you can't just lie to your children and perpetrate frauds upon their mother
right.
and bring them into it. That's not good for them.
Yeah.
The punishment is like harsh, but actually relatively realistic if it were just that. But I think that you're right that it's not just that. It's like you are dressing as a lady, sir.
That's what I couldn't tell, because again, I think that his motive seemed very pure, and I know that the judge kind of calls him on that and says, hey, you're an actor, and you fooled everybody, and now you've made this impassioned speech, but I don't believe you, and so there's a problem. I do want to call out we have a super chat from Troy McDonald. It says, hi from Maine. So thank you from Maine. We appreciate it. Must be cold up there. I mean, I'm in North Carolina and I'm way too cold, and it's like 30s. So I cannot imagine living in the north. I think you live in the northern areas too, and it's like negative degrees there.
It was a couple of days ago, but we got up to 17 today. It's lovely. Yeah,
Whew.
I'm in Chicago, but we just had the wind chill over the weekend was low as like negative 40. It's totally
Well,
crazy.
I yeah, Ronald said high Troy must be below zero up there. So hopefully you guys, wherever you are staying warm. Or if you're in Florida, I'm jealous. That's how I'm going to put
Mhm.
that. Okay, so before so when it ends, he gets the job as the children's show host, which I think it's interesting that the guy who used to be the host ends up being like the mailman, which
Yeah.
has very Pee Wee Herman vibes about the mailman being there, and
Oh, I thought it
or
was like
John
Mr. McFeely.
or Johnny Karate. I don't know. So when he comes in and does does that, I'm like, I feel sorry for that dude, but at least he still got a gig.
Hmm.
And it's a neat little show and a children's show. But at the very end, he makes this sort of a speech on his show that I think she's watching, and it's talking to kids who have, like, he gets a letter, and the letter is from a little girl, Katie, who says that her mommy and daddy aren't going to live together anymore, and what does that mean? And so he gives this speech that kind of wraps up the whole premise of the divorce and how families move on, and in it he's talking about families are different, and they sometimes look like this and sometimes look like that. I think that in 2024 we would include a couple other things, but as they're going through, and it's like you can have a mommy, or you can have one parent, or you can have two, or you can have step parents and all that. And then he kind of gets in the car with the kids because she has agreed to let him have full custody now that she sees Mrs. Doubtfire and the show that he's put together, and
No,
understands.
she agrees to let them take him for 4 hours after school,
Yeah, exactly.
not to give
Not full
custody to him.
custody,
Yeah,
but to rip up the custody agreement that says he has to
yeah.
have supervised time with them. So they drive off, and you're still hearing Mrs. Doubtfire's speech as like kind of curtain closes, and I thought it was a sad ending. thought
Yeah,
it was
I
a sad
cry
ending.
I don't think it's sad. I think, but I think it's like realistic, and I think it also, it makes me cry, but it doesn't make me feel sad, if that makes sense. It's like emotional, and like this is, uh, a good thing for kids to hear, and it's a good way to wrap up the movie. But also, like, it is a little bit sad. If he could have only gotten it together during the marriage, in that 14 years that she gave him to try to get his life together, would be a little less sad.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, that's just the thing is when I'm watching it, I'm just like, it seemed a little bit of a sad ending. Like, I wonder, like, it was a bold move for them not to get back together because that happens a lot, right? Is that the mom and dad get back together, but they were very purposeful, and that didn't happen. That they are, and they say that kind of in his ending speech is that sometimes mommies and daddies aren't in love with each other anymore, but they still love the kids, and they're better, separately than they are together, and so, I mean, maybe it needed to end that way, but I thought it was a little bit of a
Yeah,
sad
but
ending.
I don't think that's, I think that's helpful for like the many children in the 90s who were children of divorce, like myself. Like, it's not helpful to have a parent trap situation every single thing you see. Because, like, why can't my parents be like that? It's
Yeah,
nice to end a movie that's like, nope, this is like, I see my family reflected here, and like, we're going to accept this. And I mean, like, and then be able to see that, like, actually they are going to be better people and better parents on their own,
yeah,
even if it doesn't look like my family looked 2 years ago.
yeah. No, I understand. I understand. So let me ask this question. Once you saw this movie, did you say to yourself, you know what? I like this movie, but you know what would make it perfect is if it was a musical comedy on Broadway. Like, did you think to yourself,
No.
what movie needs to be a musical comedy is Mrs. Doubtfire? I mean, I know that they
No,
do that
never
with a
crossed
lot
my
of
mind.
IP that become Broadway shows, and I saw somebody else mention this in the chat earlier about the Mrs. Doubtfire the musical. But there are a lot of things that get turned into musicals: Shrek the musical, and Seussical the musical, and Back to the
Yeah.
Future, and things like that. But um, I assume you haven't seen this yet. Do you want to see this?
I would see it. If I lived in New York, I would see it. You know what I did see was A Christmas Story, the musical on
Mm-hmm.
Broadway, because that comes, I guess, seasonally, and I saw it years ago. That didn't need to happen, but I saw it anyway. This also doesn't need to happen. It's also one of those things where it's just like, if it's not Robin Williams doing this role, it's like probably really hard to watch. And if it's not Sally Field, it's probably really hard to watch. So much of that movie being good and watchable is because it's so well cast. So you turn it into a musical, and you have other people on the stage, and you don't get the nuances of the face acting that you have in the movie when it's on the stage. So I just think it could be cartoonish really quickly, but I'd see it.
Well, and I'm looking at this and I see like the cast, and you've got Miranda, Daniel, Lydia, we've got Christopher, and there's Stuart, Wanda. I don't know Wanda Selner. I don't know what that character is. I'm not off the top of my head. And then this is Frank. So was Andre like Frank's partner? I can't remember. A couple Natalie's a Mr. Jolly. So yeah, there
And
was a couple.
Jack was it was yeah, Jack. It was Aunt Jack. Uncle Frank and Aunt Jack, right?
Maybe. Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't remember that part. But I will say it is. I this is touring. I'm going to see it. It's part of a
Oh, are
series
you?
that I have. Yeah, part of a series that I have. So I will see it, and I'll report back to you and let you know how it is. But it's odd to me. Like, part of me is like, okay, I like this IP. I like this movie, but do I think it needed to be a musical? I don't know. I feel like that not everything needs to be one. I don't know.
No.
We'll see. Kind of like uh, I think when we were talking about 2024 Disney and on Park Center, and Desi kept going, I'm going to wait until I till I can see what the Country Bear show is before I pass judgment on it. And I think that that's something that we probably need to do. So I will wait and go and see Mrs. Doubtfire and figure out what's going on there. So,
Report back.
so yeah, we've talked about all of the things in Mrs. Doubtfire. Before we move on to Final Judgment, I want to say thank you to everybody who's watching. Appreciate you. Our WIGS members, we love our WIGS, the WDWNT Interglobe Society. Thank you guys so much for being members of our Patreon family. If you want more information, go to patreon.com/WDWNT. Also, if you hadn't already seen it, we did a Park Center on Sunday. Would love to have you stop by and watch last week's Park Center. We had Michelle, who is one of our social media people who is also semi-TikTok famous. Somebody actually called that out and was like, hey, is that the Potato Land girl? So Michelle was on for the first time. Come check out Park Center from last week, and then join us this week at 9 p.m. Patrick will be fresh back from his trip. He's been sending me pictures of all of his munchlings and his popcorn buckets and all that kind of stuff. So, and Allison, I think you're going to be on too. So it'll be an exciting time. And also, don't forget that next week we are wrapping up January, or getting close to wrapping up January. We did Elemental, a Star Wars TV ranking, Mrs. Doubtfire tonight, and we're going to be doing Dumbo, the 1941 cartoon with my good friend Maleko on Deep in the Plus next Wednesday. So lots of content coming up. Please join us whenever you can. But now, Allison, here it is, the moment of truth. And I don't think this is a surprise, but would you recommend this movie?
I do. I do recommend it. Look, it doesn't hold up exactly by 2024 standards. And please, for the love of all that is holy, do not remake this movie. Like, please don't. Just leave it as it is. But yes, I think I definitely recommend it. It is, I think, iconic and worth the watch for the like 90s nostalgia, for the like comedy, and for like the real emotions that it depicts.
Yeah, I agree. But I will say that when 20th Century Fox was purchased, I was very excited to have all of this content on Disney Plus, and there's still a ton of it that's not. I wish Die Hard was on Disney Plus, and maybe when they merge Hulu with Disney Plus, we'll talk about it, because our only rule on Deep in the Plus is it has to be on Disney Plus. That's why we didn't review this the first time. But this is one of those that I was excited to say, okay, it's now a Disney property. It wasn't. 20th Century Fox, they own it, and now it's a Disney property. And so I would definitely recommend it. I do think that it stands the test of time. I think it is an important, I think not an important movie necessarily, but I think it's one of those in pop culture that you should know, that people reference from time to time. And it's an enjoyable movie. It's a 2 hour and 6 minute movie, so it's a semi-fast watch, rated PG-13, and again, it is on Disney Plus, which forever it wasn't on Disney Plus. We had to wait for it to come back, like so many other things. I think everything you and I were going to review has come back to Disney Plus, except for Maleficent the First. So
Such a weird one to not come back. For this to come back and not that makes no sense. But sure.
Yeah, we did Anastasia. That one came back, and we did this one. So I'm excited to hear what everybody else has to say. So if you have thoughts, nostalgia, whatever, and leave us a comment in the video below and tell us what you thought. And again, thanks to everyone who was hanging out with us tonight in the chat. We love seeing what you guys are talking about. And and hopefully you'll join us Sunday for Park Center at 9 p.m. and next week on Deep in the Plus on Wednesday for Dumbo. Thank you guys. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.